Okay, hi everyone. Sorry we're a little bit late. My name is Sherry Hume, and I'm a co-founder of CureJM, and I'm the mom to Parker. He's now 18. He was diagnosed when he's 4, and he has been in remission for about 4 years now. So I have the honor to introduce Dr. Lisa Ryder. She is the Deputy Chief of the Environmental Autoimmunity Group at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences of the National Institutes of Health. She is a consultant and attending physician and clinical professor of medicine at the George Washington University Myositis Center, which is a CureJM-funded endeavor. She has been researching JM for over 20 years and has published more than 125 peer-reviewed papers. Dr. Ryder co-chairs the International Myositis Assessment and Clinical Studies Group, which has developed new response and classification criteria for JDM and DM. Dr. Ryder co-leads the Myogen study to identify new genetic risk factors for JDM and DM, and also co-leads the Childhood Myositis Heterogeneity Study, a national registry that CureJM has helped support. Dr. Ryder co-edited Myositis in You, a book I'm sure many of you have, and that's a JM guidebook that CureJM funded. Last year, she received the Research and Hope Award for Excellence in Government Research from the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. That's a huge, prestigious award that we're so proud of Dr. Ryder for winning. She currently serves as the chair of the CureJM Medical Advisory Board. It's quite a lot of accomplishments. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryder, who will talk about clinical trials.
I use this one, but thank you for the very, very warm welcome, and thank you all for being here today. And I see many familiar faces in the audience, many, and I appreciate all of you coming to learn more about this topic. And we're just half a minute delayed to just get the slides going. So we'll be right with you. But I also wanted to particularly thank Sherry because she really put a lot of effort into getting this session ready. And really, I couldn't have done this without all of the groundwork that she laid to get this presentation together. So I'm really, really super appreciative of all her efforts, too. Okay. So we're going to talk about JM drug trials, a summary of what's underway, but really I want to start out with something about what is a trial and what is, what is the whole process of doing trials and studies, and what are some of the regulations that have favored or not favored getting things into our pipeline for JM, if you will, and then what do we have in the pipeline, if you will. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about. We're not meant to talk the whole session, but leave some time for you all to ask lots of questions as well. So clinical trials, and this is actually from Sherry, that you have the power to advance research so new treatments will be available for our children and grandchildren. The power is with you. And I think that's very, very true. What is a clinical trial? Clinical trials or research trials are research studies that involve human volunteers. We have two different types of trials. We have observational trials, in which researchers observe patients at a single point in time or over a period of time and analyze the data that will help advance our understanding of JM. And that could include analysis of drug therapies. So you heard about the CARA registry, or the Childhood Myositis Heterogeneity Study, or the studies we have at NIH right now, the Sibling Study or the Myra study. These are observational studies. Interventional trials are those that test the safety and effectiveness of a drug or biologic therapy. A drug, I think you're more familiar with, is a chemical entity that has therapeutic use. So medications that many of your children are taking: prednisone, methotrexate, mycophenolate mofetil, cyclosporin. These are drug therapies. Biologics, in contrast, are usually composed of proteins. They can be composed of nucleic acids or sugars or combinations. They could even be cells or tissues, and they're regulated a little bit differently. They're made a little differently, and they're regulated a little differently. We have different steps of drug development. Of course, you'd all like to have tested drugs that we know are safe and proven to be effective for your children, and you'd like to have them right now, but it actually takes a long time to make it there. And let me just go through some of those steps. The first is drug discovery, that you just have to develop or discover a drug that could even be used to treat a disease. Then you have drug development, where you have to first conduct experiments to look at the efficacy, the side effects, the ideal dosage, the best way to give the drug. Even before that's done, we do something called preclinical trials, where that drug will first be tested in animals or in a test tube that's called in vitro, that would collect data that would support the rationale and the safety for doing the tests in humans. And then next thing we need to test drugs in humans are something called investigational new drug applications, also known as IND. These are applications that are filed with the Food and Drug Administration that outlines the sponsor's plans for doing the trial. If the FDA approves the IND, then the trial can begin. So it's an oversight process, if you will, to be sure trials will be conducted safely. We have a number of safety features that are part of clinical trials. One is that the trial will follow a detailed protocol or steps or guided rules that also follow regulations for conducting research with humans. The other is that everybody who participates in a study, be it observational or interventional, every volunteer will receive a consent form that really goes over the entire study, what's involved, what are their rights and responsibilities, what is all the information about that study, what are all the risks and the benefits for that study or that drug or trial intervention. So that you read over, you learn about that from the investigators, and then you sign on to that study, if you will. Okay? And you're usually given a period to think about that before you would sign on. IRB, or Institutional Review Board, is another board that oversees and approves studies. They look at it to be sure that it would be safe to do, that it's ethical, that everything would be appropriate, that important questions will be answered, and that there's enough power or information that will be collected to answer those questions, that really some important information will be learned. So that's the IRB. They look over the study, and they not only approve it, but they look at it every single year and reapprove that study, that you can go on and continue it. There are many other steps involved with the clinical trial, just the conduct of it. You have to draft the concept for the trial. You have to get funding to do the trial. That often requires some type of grant application, often multiple grant applications. There's often a scientific review. That might be in the grant process, or it might be by other review boards or panels. You develop the protocol once you're given the funding and the go-ahead that this looks promising to go forward with the trial. Then you have to develop that detailed protocol and all the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, to do the study. Then you do the IRB and FDA approval that we just talked about. You then develop a team. You're not going to do this study by yourself. You're going to have a team of people that are going to include a protocol coordinator, data managers, laboratory personnel, people to enter the data, other people to help. We then have to create the database that's going to house all the information that's collected, the research data for the study. We then advertise and recruit for the study. That's probably the first time you hear from us, is when we start to advertise and recruit. Then we have ongoing monitoring. So every year, as I said, we resubmit that protocol to the IRB. They check and see that there hasn't been any new safety problem, that everything is progressing okay, enrollment is progressing okay, new things are being learned appropriately, etc. We also do outside study monitoring. We have people that come in and look over our records every year from outside. We call them study monitors, to be sure that everything is also being conducted appropriately according to regulations and that everything is being done safely. If we're doing a treatment trial, then we would have a data safety monitoring board. That would be an independent board or panel that would look over the data, usually at least twice in a year. They are independent. They don't have any biases, if you will, And they're going to be sure, again, that the trial is being done safely and that that it's okay for the people to continue to go forward and collect new information, continue to keep people on the treatment. There are sometimes that trials are done where they're ended early because sometimes there's no signal of benefit. So patients are coming through and there doesn't seem to be any signal of benefit. Sometimes there are too severe adverse events or side effects with the treatment, and they would say, really, you shouldn't go on with this treatment. There are too many problems. Maybe it needs modification. So the Data Safety Monitoring Board helps decide those things. Then we have to do data entry and data analysis. And then finally, we present the results and publish them so other physicians and researchers can learn the information, and you can learn the information as well. So there are many, many steps, and it takes many years for these things to happen. So there are different phases of therapeutic trials. The first, phase 1, is the first in human use. And usually we try to see that the drug first is safe in a small group of human volunteers. Usually it's first introduced into healthy volunteers. And often there are multiple doses given. So one patient might get a placebo or sugar pill. The next patient might get a very, very low dose that might not really be effective. The next patient might get a little bit higher. The next one a little bit higher than that. So multiple doses are tested to see the different safety pieces of that drug and how effective it might be. Phase 2 is a bigger study, usually, that then establishes the safety and effectiveness of the drug in a larger group of patients. Usually it's also in that particular disease. So this is where we're moving into myositis or rheumatoid arthritis in phase 2. Phase 3 then would be a study that's even further along that has had some phase 2 studies and then would test the drug's effectiveness and monitor the safety in a larger group of patients in multiple centers usually. Usually this is a pivotal study, sometimes called a licensure study. Phase 4 then is done post-marketing. These are not studies that are always done, but they've been done more, for example, with the new biologic treatments, particularly in children. We typically do have phase 4 studies now. And then after the drug is brought to market, then we're trying to see about any side effects that are going on that weren't picked up in the trials in larger numbers of patients that are actually out in practice using the medicine. So it's very important to volunteer for trials. As you heard, it can take really more than a decade to do a study and learn the information, and it can take lots of money to develop drugs, millions of dollars. So just making it to a clinical trial is extraordinary, especially for a rare disease. But one of the points, and this is the point that Sherry had when she helped me put this together, it's a very important point that the lack of volunteers in clinical trials, it's one of the greatest challenges that we're facing to get the research done. And they're crucial. These volunteers are crucial to get this information and to get new drugs to the pharmacy and on our shelves. So we have many trials. The majority of trials are delayed because of the difficulty of enrolling adequate numbers of patients. And it's not just patients that are needed. Sometimes it's family members or friends or healthy controls that are also needed in these studies as volunteers. The success rate is low for trials. Only 12% of drugs entering clinical development make it to pharmacy shelves. Only 36% of drugs make it from phase 2 to phase 3, and only 2/3 of drugs proceed after phase 3. So again, it's quite costly, several $billion to develop drugs altogether. This is the total cost, $2.6 billion since 2003 for our drug development costs in this country. We have particular challenges with rare diseases to do clinical trials, like JM, for example. The disease is a small population. We know, as you heard this morning and at other of these events, that we're not just dealing with one condition, it's heterogeneous. There are little subgroups of patients. We often don't understand the disease fully, so we don't know fully about the natural history. We have lack of regulatory and drug development precedent. We don't have other drugs approved for juvenile myositis. We have only one drug approved, which was the precursor of prednisone that was approved in the 1950s. That's the only drug approved for myositis. So we often have a lack of pharmaceutical and funding interest to do drug development for myositis. We also have limited numbers of patients to do these efficacy trials. And even preparing patients to come into the trial when they're at the right point in time. Their disease has to be active, but it has to be stably active. And they have to have a lower dose of steroids. They sometimes have to be far out from other medications to be able to take the new drug. So it can be a challenge. We've had several incentives that have helped things along a bit, that have helped develop new drugs for rare diseases. The first was the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. This one helped give more expedited approval processes over 4 to 6 months instead of 16 to 18 months. It gave companies incentives to say you could have extra period of exclusivity for your drug if you could get it licensed for an orphan disease. It gave them 2 extra years of no competition. There also became grants available to do some of these studies, so the government funded portion of it so the company wouldn't have to fund it all. So the companies could apply for grants, or the investigators could apply for grants, particularly for orphan diseases. They also would get some tax credits to defer some of their costs and waive drug application fees, which can be very expensive. And then they would put these drugs onto fast track in the review process. Another big incentive became the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher, in which pharmaceutical companies that develop drugs for life-threatening rare diseases, and JM is one of those that qualifies, they can get a voucher to move to the front of the queue in the FDA review process. They don't have to use it to develop a drug for JM. They could say they're going to develop a drug for JM, but they could use that voucher for another drug in their queue. And these things also can be bought and sold. So these have monetary value to companies too. And there was one voucher sold for quite a bit of money, actually, from one company to another. So I just want to show you on this slide a little bit about some of the pediatric legislation that has also helped drug development. And the one that's helping very most right now for JM is called the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act. We have 2 other pediatric acts. One is the Pediatric Research Equity Act. I'm going to explain why that doesn't help JM very much. And then the European pediatric regulation also is helpful if the Europeans are developing something for myositis. That helps JM in the US too. I'll explain that. So one is that the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act is optional. It's not required for companies to do this. It's their option whether they want to do this or not. And then the timing, if they did want to, would be at the end of phase 2. They would maybe have that drug or biologic in development for another indication, and then they would come in and say, we want to do it in JM. What would be the reward? They would get 6 months of exclusivity on their patent. This is only for drugs, no biologics. Drugs only are covered by this. And orphan indications are included. The reason that the Pediatric Research Equities Act, which does cover the biologics, the reason that doesn't help JM is that that is only for indications that are not orphan diseases. So if you have adult rheumatoid arthritis, a biologic therapy was developed for adult rheumatoid arthritis, then you could come in under this act and say you could get your biologic approved for juvenile idiopathic arthritis, because that juvenile form of the disease, although it's orphan, the adult form is not. Adult rheumatoid arthritis is a very common disease. So that one helps JIA drug development, really biologic development. It doesn't help juvenile myositis, though, unfortunately. It's a little loophole. European pediatric regulation also helps, though, if drugs or biologics are wanting to be developed, companies want licensure, and they want to do it in Europe, then the Europeans are mandating that if there's a pediatric component to that disease, that they develop a pediatric plan in phase 1, really early, actually. and they would also get 6 months of patent extension, and this includes both drugs and biologics. So it's really good for us if the Europeans those companies want to get licensure in Europe, then the Europeans will mandate that they have to do it, and then we will get trials in the US too out of that. Okay, these incentives, though, have been helpful. Since in 1996, we had 57 new drugs approved, but very few of these were for orphan indications. But in 2015, orphan drug approvals comprised almost half of the FDA-approved drugs. That's quite a bit. 21 of 45 drugs were approved for rare diseases. And we've had 500 orphan drugs approved in the last 3 decades. Now, what's the importance of approval? Why is that a good thing? FDA approval, a licensed indication for juvenile myositis. Why would that be good? First, you're getting licensed indications for rare diseases. I can name several that have recently been done, like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or lipodystrophy. There are some very rare conditions out there that have had approved indications. The one benefit is that you could get insurance coverage for that medication if it's on label and licensed. The other is that you have much more availability of much needed treatments for these very rare conditions. It really has been extremely helpful for patients. The negative, you might also be reading about a little bit in the newspaper, is that some of these drugs can be sold for lots and lots of money. They're very, very expensive sometimes. So that is some of the negative about this. For myositis, even though we have all these regulations and they have been helpful, we still have more investigator-initiated interest in trying new drugs and biologics than we have company or pharmaceutical interest. We have a little bit more than we used to, but we don't have an extraordinary amount of pharmaceutical interest just yet. So there are benefits of volunteering for trials. One is that you might get access to a treatment that might not otherwise be available outside the trial. You might be able to try a treatment that would be more effective or even potentially safer than a standard treatment that your child has been receiving, and you would be the first to benefit in that trial. Or you might have exhausted the standard treatment options and you're looking for a new treatment, and that trial could be really helpful, providing a new treatment option for your child. You would be closely monitored by the researchers, and you would have additional testing, and you'll have the chance to see more doctors and learn more about your disease. And your involvement will definitely help move the research forward and learn more about not just that treatment, but about the disease. It's going to help a lot for other patients. There are risks of volunteering for trials. One is that the new treatment, once it's been tested, might not be better than the standard treatment that your child's been getting. Or it might have side effects that the researchers didn't expect. You may need additional visits to the doctor and additional tests. You might not benefit from the new treatment. You have to qualify to be part of the study. That's first. And then participation in a study takes time. You have to be dedicated. Of course, all of you are dedicated. We know that. You're all here. So I just now want to go over what types of trials we currently have available for juvenile myositis, just to give you awareness about that. I'm going to start with a few of the observational studies that are currently available. The first one is our NIEHS studies of families with twins or siblings discordant for systemic rheumatic diseases. And this is a study in which you have one child in the family or adult patient who has been diagnosed with one of 4 systemic rheumatic diseases in the past 5 years. So it's juvenile dermatomyositis, juvenile polymyositis, but it could be adult or juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, or systemic sclerosis. And they have a same gender sibling who is within 5 years of age who has no autoimmune disease. So we're trying to understand, why did one of those family members get sick with autoimmune disease and the other one remain healthy? And we're trying to do studies both on genetic factors and environmental factors to try to figure that out. So what's involved in this study is medical histories and physical exams, blood and urine testing, parent and patient questionnaires, and we would like parents to enroll in this study when they're available to help with that genetic piece. Everybody is paid upon completion $100. There is no charge for the evaluations in this study, and you can do this study either by coming to see us at National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, or you can do it from your home. You can enroll from home. We have a home enrollment process as well. The second one is NIEHS Environmental Risk Factors for Antisynthetase Syndrome study. This one is looking at patients who have the JO1 autoantibody and other antisynthetase autoantibodies. And you heard about that this morning, that there are these different myositis autoantibodies. This is one in particular, one of these markers in the blood. Many of these patients have lung disease and arthritis and other features, but they have this particular autoantibody in the blood. And it's people with this autoantibody who are within 2 years of diagnosis compared to those without, and to healthy individuals who live near those patients. These people need to do a history and physical, blood and urine testing, questionnaires. We have them do a vacuum dust sample of their bedroom and other clinically indicated tests. This one is, again, there's no charge. You can do the study at home, or you can come see us in Bethesda, Maryland, and again, paying $100 for completion. The last study that we have at NIH is our myositis natural history study. This one, remember, we talked about having a study that would take a lot of information down, no intervention, a lot of information about the illness, also doing studies on genetics and environmental factors, doing a lot of different evaluations, imaging studies, biomarker studies, trying to look at different pieces of myositis in children and adults. Usually, patients who like to enroll in this study are ones that have come to see us when they enrolled in one of the other two studies, and they want a more thorough evaluation of their illness. We also are very focused right now on patients who are having a lot of calcinosis, because we're doing special studies to look a little bit more at them. And then patients where more than one family member has myositis. So that's another group of interest that we would just enroll them only in this study. So this one usually requires a few days of evaluation, no charge for the testing, again, $100 upon completion. So we now have a few therapeutic trials too that are open to JM patients, and I'd like to talk about those as well. The first one I mentioned this morning is the abatacept in juvenile dermatomyositis trial, AID trial. This one is looking at the molecule that's attached to antigen-presenting cells, or B cells or muscle cells, and this abatacept is binding that particular molecule and blocking the binding of this to activate the T cells. So then the T cells are not activated. So this, we're hoping, is going to dampen down the extra immune system, if you will. The immune system is over-revved up. We're hoping to damp it down as part of the treatment in a more specific way. This trial is open to patients who have JDM, juvenile dermatomyositis, 7 years of age or older, moderately active disease. They have had an inadequate response to prednisone and at least one other treatment, and are at least 3 months from diagnosis, and they weigh at least 66 pounds. So this one, just a little bit more details. It's located at George Washington University Myositis Center in Washington, D.C. All the patients on the study, all 10 patients, will receive the treatment as an injection subcutaneously under the skin weekly. After 3 months, if you haven't responded, your child hasn't responded to the treatment, the dose can be increased. We're looking at a lot of different questionnaires, assessments in the clinic, blood testing, and MRIs over 5 visits over 6 months to see how the response is going. If the response went very well at the end of the 6 months, then we have the ability to extend the time on the treatment free of charge for another 6 months. This travel for this study is covered by the trial after the screening evaluation, as is the testing and the medication. And then you can contact the GW Center to see if, if there's interest, you would contact them to see about setting up a screening visit. Another study that is going on now, it's actually for adult patients who are 18 years of age or older who have either dermatomyositis or juvenile dermatomyositis. This one is called Acthar gel. It's a little bit complicated, but it's adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, and it's an analog of that that's being used to try to treat the skin manifestations of dermatomyositis. So this ACTH actually usually signals through the adrenal gland. You might have heard about that, as does prednisone, also signals through the adrenal gland and suppresses it. But this Acthar gel also has receptors on different immune cells. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with the pointer. Here we go. This Acthar gel has different receptors on different immune cells, and the hope is that this would bind these receptors too, and potentially, again, dampen different pieces of the immune system. This injection is taken as an injection under the skin twice weekly. The trial is offering it for 6 months for the patients who qualify. You have to have 4 visits at Cleveland Clinic that include clinical testing, questionnaires, blood draws, and very careful clinical assessment of how you're responding to the treatment. In this trial, everybody will receive medication. There's no placebo. And the medication and clinic visits are free, and you would be paid $50, but there are no travel funds available for this trial. Another trial that's open for adult dermatomyositis and polymyositis, but also open to juvenile dermatomyositis patients who are over 18 years of age. This is called tocilizumab. It's an IL-6 receptor monoclonal antibody therapy. So this IL-6 is a hormone in the immune system called a cytokine. It's a pro-inflammatory hormone that once it binds on cells and signals them, more inflammation is generated. This tocilizumab binds to that IL-6 directly, the soluble receptor that's found in the blood, or it can bind to the receptor that's on the cells, and that prevents the IL-6 from binding to the receptor and signaling. So it's shutting it down, if you will. So in this trial, patients would have active disease, moderately active disease, and also fail steroids and at least one other treatment. They would get tocilizumab as a venous treatment, intravenous treatment, every 4 weeks, but they could be randomized to receive placebo during this trial. And then again, the doctors will assess on a monthly basis the clinical assessment, the questionnaires, the blood testing. This trial is being run at several different centers. I don't know all the centers, but the leading center is Dr. Otis at University of Pittsburgh. He's a very experienced trial investigator. He's the one who ran the rituximab and myositis trial that you heard about this morning. And then another trial that's open again for adults with juvenile dermatomyositis is called belimumab. Belimumab is targeting, it's a monoclonal antibody that targets a molecule called BLyS. And BLyS is another little one of these hormones of the immune system that binds to and signal B lymphocytes, another immune cell. So this BLyS is bound by the belimumab and then can't signal the B lymphocytes. It's blocking the signaling. So this one again would be open to adults with dermato and polymyositis or to adults who have JDM or juvenile polymyositis. This one, they want to have patients who have autoantibodies present, and they'll test for that at the baseline. And then they have to have refractory myositis. Many of these trials, it's the same. You have to have tried prednisone and at least one other treatment, and your disease is still active despite that. This trial is being conducted in New York, on Long Island, and also in Phoenix, Arizona. So there are 2 enrolling centers. And this is also a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, so you might receive placebo during this trial, but I believe in this trial you would be ultimately switched to active drug if you had been on placebo and not responded. Then Dr. Galina Marder, who's an adult myositis researcher, is the principal investigator of this trial. There is another trial being conducted at Children's Hospital in Toronto called Toronto Sick Kids. This one just enrolled their final patient, but I just want to inform you about it because we'll probably be learning more about the results of this trial in the future. This is being led by Dr. Brian Feldman, and it's looking at a creatine supplement, which is an over-the-counter type of supplement to look at the effects on muscle function in children with myositis. So it's looking at the effect of this supplementation on muscle function, fatigue, energy, metabolism, and quality of life. So patients ages 7 to 18 who were stable were allowed to enroll in this trial. They took the creatine supplement 3 times a day for 6 months. And they did different types of muscle testing, including bicycle exercise testing called cycloergometry. They are also looked at spectroscopy, which looks at the metabolites in the muscle through an MRI type of test. And they looked at other things like fatigue and quality of life. So we're looking forward to seeing the results of this trial once it becomes available. So there are other trials available right now for adults with dermatomyositis. There are actually 8 other trials. I don't want to go into all details here. These are not currently available to JDM patients, but the hope is that if some of these treatments seem very promising in adults, that maybe they would be tried in JDM down the road. So one of them that we discussed this morning is a drug treatment called tofacitinib. And this treatment is inhibiting a kinase called a JAK kinase that is signaling another hormone in the immune system called interferon. And you heard from Dr. Reed that these interferons are very highly upregulated, highly expressed in JDM patients. And this one is blocking or dampening down that pathway somewhat specifically. So we're hopeful that this might be a future area for research for JM. There are trials of subcutaneous immunoglobulin. There's a trial of a toll receptor antagonist. There's a trial of a monoclonal antibody that's blocking dendritic cells. Dendritic cells are some of the immune cells that secrete a lot of this interferon cytokine. There's a trial called rosnilimab, which is an endocannabinoid mimetic drug. There's another one that's a vaccine against interferon alpha. And then there's one that's looking at lung disease very specifically, and one looking at exercise in adults with myositis. And actually, I'm going to tell you that, which I didn't speak about this morning, but exercise is another very promising avenue for future therapeutic research. We're learning in adults and some children that exercise can be beneficial for strength and function and quality of life. And we're starting to learn that some of the signals in the muscle, the inflammation signals, can be dampened down with exercise treatment. And some of the bioenergetics or metabolism genes can do better with exercise that we can see in the muscle. So 2 trials in adults have supported that. So I think exercise is a promising therapy to think about for future trials. We also have trials, a lot of drug development going on for juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I want to tell you about this. I think it's a little bit important for you to know about this if your child has juvenile myositis. So we have a number of licensed drugs and biologics now for JRA, what used to be called JRA, now known as JIA. This includes anti-TNF therapies, IL-1 blocking therapies, abatacept, and tocilizumab. Now, the anti-TNF therapies I didn't speak about this morning. There's been some trials, very small trials, in adults and children with very mixed data. So we're not sure these are going to be a very good avenue of treatment of JM. There's one that's still being looked at a little bit in some open studies in Europe. There are other new biologic treatments coming along that are just entering trials now. A new anti-TNF monoclonal. The anti-BLyS that I talked about for adult myositis is getting tried in children with JIA. Rituximab that you heard about this morning, that's already been tried in JDM. And tofacitinib, that JAK kinase inhibitor, is getting tried in JIA. And some trials have recently completed recruitment that we'll be hearing about results. And another thing that's happening a lot in JIA trials is that these treatments that have been licensed are getting studied long-term. The phase 4 studies to look for the safety signals is being done a lot with the JIA patients. So what is the importance of JIA trials? Why would we care about that? Our children have myositis, so why do we care about JIA? Well, first is that that's helpful to have dosing and safety information in another pediatric rheumatic disease. Kids and rheumatic disease, it's helpful to have that information. It makes it a lot easier to study those treatments in our kids with juvenile myositis when those things are already established for another disease. Another thing is that if that agent is licensed for JIA, we're seeing some doctors, I'm seeing some doctors, if your child has arthritis with their juvenile myositis, sometimes your doctor might code your child is having juvenile arthritis. And you'll say, gee, my child doesn't have juvenile arthritis, why are they doing that? But that can help get those medicines that you could get them covered under your insurance. So that's a little back avenue for that. So that helps. And I talked earlier about why are there more trials for JIA than juvenile myositis. It was because of that act, that pharmaceutical act that allowed more development of biologic treatments for more common diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, where the pediatric form is slipping in under there, even though it's an orphan disease. So there's a pipeline to be able to do these development in the children with JIA. So that's why we're seeing more development in JIA. Okay, and now it's Sherry's turn.
So thank you, Dr. Ryder. So what is CureJM doing to help with the drug trials? We have, with your help and the help of the CureJM community, we've funded over $11 million in research and educational programs. We're currently funding research at 18 prestigious medical research institutions. We collaborate with our medical advisory board comprised of 5 world-renowned JM experts to help determine our research strategy. We've, with the help of this lovely lady on the front row, let's call her out, we've been able to invest in funding a program and I think we've talked about it this morning, at the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. And this is really a very, very exciting program. We are funding a postdoctoral fellow there, and he's going to only work on JM for 3 years in drug development. And this program will develop assays to test new drugs for JDM in vitro. And once these assays are developed, we hope that existing drugs can be tested. And then as a further goal is to test new drugs as well as existing drugs used for other diseases. So we're looking at repurposing drugs as well. So if it's working in another disease, it's already been approved for that, it's easier to get it approved for JM because that's called repurposing the drug. So, the ultimate goal is to come up with new treatments for JDM. So this is a very exciting program. It's basically in its infancy at NCATS. So we feel like we're getting in at the ground level, and they've been very supportive with us. Michael J. Fox's foundation is there too. So, just a very few foundations are in on it right now. Also, we've been talking to multiple pharmaceutical companies about adding JM to their existing clinical trials. And also adding clinical trials once they determine that their drugs are safe and effective in adults with DM. So once they've had a trial, as we were looking at the DM trials, and they've proven that it's effective in adults, then let's move it into JM and see if it works there. And then also, I know you saw a lot of trials where they had JM, but only for adults with JM. The reason there is it's easier to test in adults because the children are so little and young. So let's get it approved in adults first, and then it's really easy to move it into the children. So that's actually really good for us that we have adults that actually have a juvenile form. You can't say that in very many diseases. So that makes that's good for us. mean, in a sense. We don't want our kids to still have it then, but for testing in our kids, that's very helpful. Okay. So how to find out about clinical trials. There's a website called clinicaltrials.gov, and it has about every trial that's in existence, and just go on there and search juvenile dermatomyositis, and every trial that's going on will pop up. You can also register with CureJM, our patient registry, so that you receive newsletter updates about trials. And then you can always check our website. We keep that pretty up to date about what trials are going on. And then also our Facebook page, we list the trials every now and then. And then how can you help? So certainly volunteer for a clinical trial or research study if it's appropriate for your child and you. Provide support, as we're all doing now, to other JM families. Encourage them to volunteer. And get involved in fundraising to advance research. And I do have to say a big thank you. The turnout for the blood testing has been tremendous. I know I talked to the researcher last night, and we were already up to 50 families. And I know today it's been booked as well, so it's been a tremendous turnout. So thank you for that. So I will open it up to questions now. Yeah.
So the question was, if you do a trial, does your child have to go off the medications that they're currently on? So sometimes for safety reasons to test a new medicine, some medications do need to come off or be adjusted. Sometimes you want to have that the dose has been stable for several months. Certainly, we often want the prednisone to be as low as we can because we can't often taper that down further during the trial unless there's improvement. And that might take a while. So we don't want them to be on too much prednisone at the start of the trial, if possible. Sometimes medications have to be, they really do have to be off. For example, these biologic therapies, you really do have to get them off. And there's kind of a rule that they have to have a washout of 5 half-lives before the new agent could be introduced. So that's a challenge most for rituximab, which is the more commonly used treatment now, because rituximab, as you know, it takes a while to work, and the B cells can be depleted for a while. They could be depleted 6 months or longer. And then we have to not only be 5 half-lives out, which is 5 months out from rituximab when it was last given, but we also have to get some detectable level of B cells. So this is becoming a challenge to get patients in for trials. Okay, the question is about whether abatacept has been used, or abatacept. You might have the better pronunciation. So abatacept has been used. It is currently licensed for adult rheumatoid arthritis and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. There have been many studies. The IV form of the drug has been used. There's also been a trial there have been a few case reports of benefit, including one JDM patient who took the drug, or abatacept, I should say, in conjunction with another medicine and seemed to improve. And then there's been a trial in Europe that Dr. Lundberg ran from Stockholm, Sweden, Karolinska Institute, adult dermato and polymyositis patients. And that one, about half the patients seemed to get better with the treatment in the trial. Based on that, now, then, there are studies now with subcutaneous abatacept, or abatacept, and that one, in fact, I think the subcutaneous form is now licensed for use, so you don't have to take it as an injection, IV form anymore. You can have it as an injection under the skin. This one is going to be tried in adults in a very large trial. I think that the company is interested in licensure if it's a successful trial, so that one is about to open. And then we have the trial now at GW, and we have 2 patients that have enrolled so far out of the 10 that are planned. Yes. So there are children that, there's one published case. I will tell you that there are other children that I'm aware of that have received the drug that, aren't published or aren't part of a study. Yes, There are a few others. And okay, so there's one right now.
We all know how important the studies are, and we participated with you, Dr. Ryder, but how does CureJM and how do we help Dr. Ryder and the other doctors out there get people to participate? I know it's hard. It's hard. We're trying to grow chapters. We're trying to get fundraising. We're trying to get everything. But how do you get people to do that? I mean, some of them are very simple. I mean, it's blood work. It's a questionnaire. It takes time. It's an MRI. But we've been through so much with our kids. It's kind of part of the normal course. But I guess Sherry, are we looking at from CureJM pushing out there to get more people to help Dr. Ryder and the other doctors with these studies?
Actually, I'll just tell you in our sibling study that the patients that we have the largest group of are juvenile myositis. And guess why? Because of CureJM. Because you all are pushing hard and very motivated to participate. Of course, we need more patients, so keep pushing, and it's really helpful. And telling people about your experiences from participating and how that went for you or what was the benefit or, I think talking it up, it could be helpful, Sure.
It's a really good question, and we're talking about that in our board meeting this week, and we were going to have a brainstorming session with the medical advisory board to figure that out, because we have been pushing it a lot lately through our newsletters, and we've been doing everything we can as a foundation. So we've also set up a new medical network where actually you can encourage your physicians to join our medical network, and we're going to start sending out newsletters to them to encourage their patient, to encourage them to encourage their patients, because it's an easier route when your doctor says, "Hey, go enroll in this trial," than it is for us to tell you to enroll in that trial, and then you have to go tell your doctor, "Hey, I want to be in this trial." So I think it's easier the other route is to have the physicians tell you. So we're working on that as well. But yeah, that's something we are working on. Yeah. Yeah, and it's very important. And as you saw, that's the number one reason that trials fail is there's not enough patients. Now, I think that Dr. Ryder's had more come in for the abatacept trial, but they didn't qualify to be in the trial for one reason or another, and that's another issue. But I do have to say that Parker, my son, and every child is different, but Parker took abatacept. I called Orencia, same thing. He had JDM and spondylitis, and they both went into a remission when he was taking just that drug at that point. He was taking the IV version of it, but we feel that it helped both diseases. So just to let you know, and again, every child's different.
So the other piece is that you have to qualify. Some people are very interested to come, and we appreciate all the interest, but we have criteria about, you have to be eligible for the study. Fully eligible. You have to meet the criteria for the disease, that we're studying. You have to be within that window, this is for the observational studies, from diagnosis. You have to have the sibling of the same gender within 5 years. You have to have these different criteria. Some people are very interested, and then it turns out they don't meet the criteria, and we would love to work with you, but we can't. We have to stick with the criteria for the study.
Have there been any other recent breakthroughs in other autoimmune conditions with drug and therapy that would suggest that there's, optimism or hope here with JM?
Well, I think that before, if I could give you some perspective, before 1997, there were a few drugs licensed for juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and the disease was still very active, even with those few medicines, including methotrexate, that were available at the time. And many patients still had a significant disability, to be frank. Then we have seen now many new drugs and biologic treatments, particularly the biologic treatments, be licensed for juvenile arthritis in the last 2 decades. A large number, more than any that had been licensed before. It's an enormous breakthrough. That is a huge breakthrough, huge. It's really changing the outcome of the disease. I mean, you can go to, conference for juvenile arthritis patients, and there's nobody there anymore in a wheelchair, Sure.
I think just the outlook is better now because I've been doing this job for 14 years now, and just as of the last year, pharmaceutical companies are contacting me, and that didn't happen back then. So they're asking about the possibility of having clinical trials. That could be a ways off, but I think it's just a positive note. So I feel like there's a lot of hope coming in.
I know there's a difference between the juvenile dermatomyositis and the adult dermatomyositis. But if you have a young adult child who would flare and need to be treated again, could that child then would they go on an adult DM study, or would they have to still be included in the children's juvenile studies?
Yeah, so it really varies by the study. Many of these studies for adult DM and polymyositis really want patients with the adult form of the disease. There's a lot of thought still in the myositis community that there are some important differences between juvenile onset and adult onset disease. Now, some of the investigators have said, and we specifically asked them and pushed them actually, that they would take patients with JDM if they were adult age, they would take them into the study. So there are several studies now that are open to JDM patients that are now adult age. Yes. Any other questions? We still have more time. Sure.
But when you go to the clinical trials page on the NIH website, they have phone numbers and emails to reach the investigators, and they're very open to you contacting them. You just, hit the email address or call them, because they want patients, as I was saying, they want patients to enroll, so they can talk to you about the trial or what the requirements are, and you feel free to call them and contact them and ask them any questions you have.
I think also when you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you might also try looking under other search terms, like you could look under dermatomyositis and not put the juvenile in front of it, or you could check out what's going on for juvenile idiopathic arthritis if you're interested. You can also try other search terms.
Yeah, all the funds from the JM. Is there ever any consideration of giving that towards the people that would probably participate in a trial and just can't? I mean, like in our case, we built it into a week vacation to also be able to get there to get all that done. I know there's got to be some people out there that would be willing and just can't afford it. I mean, it's a week away from work and travel and that kind of stuff. Are we able to fund that through this or not?
I'll just start with some of your questions. So I will say that there are charity airline programs available for patients to come and see us at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, and at George Washington University in the myositis clinic. And many of our patients use these programs to be able to afford the air travel to come. There's even a program, I think, that sponsors train travel and car travel too. And then at the NIH, we are able to pay for the patients to stay at the NIH Children's Inn, which is like a family lodge, so patients can stay there. We can't cover all the costs, like you're saying, all the meals and stuff, but we do, upon completion, pay the patients $100 for their time and participation, so that we hope is covering some of their meal expenses. But you're right, even despite that, there are people that have difficulties beyond that, and maybe Sherry wants to take it from there. But we try to help in every way we can with it. And there is no charge for the testing at NIH, that's part of the study, and at George Washington Myositis Clinic, which I didn't, those studies aren't in clinicaltrials.gov, but we are a clinic for consultation. You have to be at least 7 years of age to come, and certainly we want to be working with your child's doctor, not just that you're coming because you want to come. we want to be partnering with them in your child's care. So, there is no charge for that clinic visit with us. So you can bring your records and your testing from home.
Yeah, if you, I would definitely recommend enrolling in an NIH trial or the GWU one because they take incredible care of you. And Dr. Ryder is an expert, saved my child's life. And you'll just get the care that you cannot get at your typical doctor's office. And at the Children's Inn, where you can stay, it's a big playground for your child. So, and that, you can get the miles, or some studies are covered on flights. So there's a lot of ways to get covered. Now, you asked if CureJM would cover something like that. Our mission is to really fund research and educational programs. So we haven't gone in that direction yet. That doesn't mean that we won't in the future, but at this time we haven't done that. But we really do have an urge to get new drugs into the marketplace. So it could be something we look into in the future. But there definitely are programs with the air miles and so there are ways to get help. And there's also trials where you can participate from home, where you can do blood work and send it in. So there are trials like that too. Including the NIH. Good question.
I just want to state that basically like Make-A-Wish and some of the air mile stuff, that if there was a way to be able to donate your air miles or something like that could come in handy, or maybe a direct fundraiser. Now that we're trying to expand into some of these other areas and put in more actual chapters, maybe they could do fundraisers for grants of some sort like that. It seems like the center where we're at in Arkansas, we've really seen a dramatic increase in people that's been diagnosed with this just in the past year since we've been involved. So, if you get a bigger footprint, maybe you get more involvement, maybe you could raise a little bit of money for that, to help out.
Back to the beta-CEP trial, could you clarify what you mean by not responding to the steroids? What qualifies for that?
Sure. So we say that the child should have moderately active disease. I should say adults are also qualified for this study, adults with JDM, but children at least 7 years of age. So they have moderately active disease. And so you heard from Dr. Reed this morning about the IMAX group and different ways we can look at the disease activity. We look at strength, we look at function, we look at blood tests, the muscle enzymes, we look at how active is the skin and the other manifestations outside of the muscles, like the joints and the lungs, the heart, other manifestations of illness. You rate how active things are, meaning how much active inflammation there is, and we rate it too. And we take all these things, and then we have these criteria for each one of these things. You have to have at least 3 out of 6 that are at least in a moderately active range. And that's despite being on prednisone. And it doesn't have to be currently on prednisone. It could have been you tried it for a certain period of time at a certain dose in the past, and it didn't work adequately, or there were intolerable side effects, and you tried one other treatment. So most people coming into a study like this will still be on the other medicines, usually, but certainly you could have tried it and be off and also come in. Does that answer your question? Okay. Usually there's an evaluation that has to go on. Yeah.
So I believe next is a reception coming up at 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you, Marge. Reception at 6, and there's probably a song and dance that you don't want to miss by the kids as well. Yeah, it's amazing every year. So, and then followed by dinner at 7. Hope everyone's going to be there. So thank you guys for coming. And thank you, Dr. Ryder. Amazing, wonderful.